Good evening, everyone. Let's continue to present project one. By now, you should be able to run the sample code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain line by line of the source code for the front end as well as for the back end. So if you go to the project one, you should be able to see two directories. The back end contains three files where the .env is auto configuration, including port number and database, username, password. Well, the other two, one dbservices.js is all the method that talk to the database. Well, app.js is the server code which call the database service in DB service and also provide the endpoint for the back end so that the front end can call these endpoints, okay? And on the other hand, the front end is going to be two files. The index.html is essentially just the static HTML, which is going to be modified. Each element in the index.html is going to be modified by the index.js, okay? Which I'm going to explain line by line. So, but before we start to talk about the both back end and the front end, let's look at the structure of the project. So essentially, we are having a web browser. So this is a web-based application. And then we have a web server. In this case, we are using the Apache web server, which runs on port 80. So when we send request, we are sending to the port 80. And then the response is going to send back from the port 80 as well. So this is how we interact with the web server. And typically, there are two methods. One is get, the other is post. We're going to talk about another few methods, including patch, including delete, including update, and so on. But these two are the main method. Typically, get is going to send the parameter from the client to the server through URL arguments, while the post is going to send through the request message itself. Okay, so so we send the request to the web server, and then the web server is going to send a response back to the web browser. And in the meanwhile, the web server is going to talk to the database through dbservices.js with a connection from the web server to the layer 3. So this is MySQL. So this is web server, so which corresponding to the MySQL is going to be here in layer 3, and the Apache is going to be in layer 2. And the web browser is going to be your IE or your Edge, your Firefox, whatever you're using. So this will divide the code into front end and back end. So by back end, we mean those function is going to run on the server side. And on the other end, for the front end, we mean the code will run on the client side. But keep in mind, regardless the client, the code, all the code will originally all stored in the server. Okay, so that's one thing. So that means when we are going to run from the front end, those files, which in this case is the front end of the two files, index.html, index.js, they will be retrieved from the back end and then move to the front end and then run in the browser. So the index.html is going to be rendered by a browser. The index.js is shipped from the back end to the front end and then run in the front end within the browser itself. On the other hand, the two other things will run on the server side. So we are talking about 4 files. Back end is going to be DB services talking to the database. There are a bunch of database methods. app.js is going to call the database methods. And then the front end, which is move from back end to the front end over here. So index.js is going to call app.js. It's not going to call DB services directory. And then index.html is going to be the makeup, the graphical interface, the HTML interface. So I think in class I give the example of first chair, second chair, third chair, and fourth chair. So that's how they interact with each other. And then I put a line over here to separate front end and back end. So now let's go to the back end. In particular, let's go to the back end database first. The database is basically make connection with all the parameter. In this case, the configuration is in the .env in this file, and we know we need to rename .env into period.env. So the DB service is using this argument to connect to a database, and this is the code to test if the connection is successful. And then all the methods of database in this case is encapsulated in one class over here. I don't know in your project. For project 1, probably you only need one service. But for project 2, maybe you are going to create multiple database services. Do you want to create one for each table, or you want to create one for multiple table or query? That's your design issue. The first method basically is a static, allows us to create a totally new object or instance of DB services and then return it. To avoid, we are going to create multiple instances. We are doing a check over here. If we already created, we are not going to new. We are just going to return the existing instance. If not, then we create a new instance, and then hopefully we are going to assign it to the instance variable. Okay. So these are all the comments over here. It's going to be what I'm going to talk about now. So you can always read these all comments to understand my presentation better. The first method, it's a synchronous function, okay? And it's asynchronous, so when you call this function, we need to make sure it's going to be like going to return immediately. So the whole structure is a try-catch. In other words, if there's an error, we can always print out in the console of the server side and you see the error message. And then inside, here's the body of the asynchronous function. One thing that we need to point out is there's a promise over here. So what is a promise? Promise is one kind of asynchronous function in which takes two arguments. One is called resolve, the other is called reject. And both of them are actually callback function, okay? So the caller need to provide these two functions. And then inside, we are going to call resolve and call reject based on success or failure. A good way to do this is you can consider the promise is one box, and then there are two output ports for promise. If it's successful, for example, when we run this query and the query successful run, then we are going to see if there's an error. Okay, so this is actually a function as well, which is anonymous. So this function have two input. One is error, the other result, and these two input actually are the output of running query over here. Okay, so that means if there's an error, then we are going to call back function, which is going to call reject, and using the error object as the input. Otherwise, we are going to call the resolve corresponding to normal execution, and using the result is the input. The result is actually the output of running this query. So you can consider this is actually connecting the query with two other functions. the result of the query will be the input of either the result or the reject based on successful or not. And you can always use the console.log to do some printing. This is a good way to do debugging. So you know if everything is as you expected over here. In particular, I use this console.log response to be able to show what is the response of this. One thing that's very important is when you call a promise, you need to use the await. Okay, if you don't use a keyword await over here, then the response is not going to be a function call. It's going to be the promise itself. So then response becomes the asynchronous function, but that's not what we want. We want to define this function and then call it. So await is like a call and a synchronous function over here. So once you do that, then the response is going to be the result of the function call. And then we could return this response back to the get all data over here. Okay. So that's how we get all data. In this case, is get all the content from the table. The other one is insert new name. So it's very similar. We are going to insert this, which is a dynamic SQL, have 2 question mark. But this 2 question mark is going to be bound to an array. In this case, is the first question mark is going to be bound to name. And how do we get the name? The name is the argument of the function. And then how do we get the date edit? Well, we use the function new date to create a JavaScript data object over here. So this is JavaScript data object. And then similarly, if it's successful, we call resolve, the callback function resolve. If a failure, we call the callback function reject. And then here we return a new tuple ID, which is the insert ID. Is going to be the result of calling the promise function. So this is the new ID of the tuple ID created, and then name the ID. So we return this is a tuple to the caller. And the reason we do that is the new tuple is inserted into a database, but we also need to return this tuple back to the front end, so the front end can show this new tuple in the table. Okay, and here is we do search by name, and so the select statement only have 1 question mark, which is going to be bound by name, the argument as of the function, and that's how we do the query, and so the rest of them is similar. And then we can also have a synchronous function called delete row by ID, 1 question mark bound by the ID, and here ID is actually from the input argument, but the input argument is a string, so we're going to pass it to an integer. So this is just converting string integer into integer, and then we can run it, and then similarly we can debug the response. If the response equal to 1 means it's successful, we are going to return true, otherwise we return false. We can also do an update over here. This time we have 2 question mark. We are going to set the name to a new name, which is the argument over here. And then the ID is also which ID is also the argument as well. Okay, and we convert the string into integer. And you can always, do a debugging first. You can comment it out to make sure that, when you call the function, the ID and new name is what you expected from the front end. Those values will be provided by the front end. All right. So we bound both of them to the corresponding real value, and then we execute the update, and then we're going to check the result by doing a debugging over here. And for all these methods to be callable by the app.js, we are going to export over here as in the last line. Okay. So next, we are going to do app.js. And keeping in mind here, the purpose of app.js is providing a bunch of endpoints. So this is one endpoint, this is another endpoint, and this is the third endpoint. So that the front end can call directory and then page over here. So I'm going to explain each endpoint one by one. The first endpoint we always want to do is, okay, I'm not going to do insert first over here. I'm going to do get all because this is the easiest one. So the get all is going to be the get all is right. Okay, this is get all. So this is how it's going to return a JSON format of all the tuples in the table. So let's look at how this is implemented. We can call the endpoint because it's a get method. So I can use the URL to call this. Okay. So you get an instance of the DB by calling DB service, get DB service instance. And then what we do is we call DB. So DB is going to be the class, the object, dot get all data. So what it's going to look like? We know it's going to look like, let's have another one over here. Let's move over here. So the back end, we are going to call DB services get all data method, which is this one. So we are calling this synchronous function, and keep in mind, we are going to have the then and a catch. So this becomes the result actually. So this is the successful callback function, and then catch is unsuccessful callback function. So both of these, this arrow thing is a function, and this arrow thing is another function. So this simply means we're going to run the promised result, and then if it's successful, then the callback function here is going to be used, which means take the output of data, which is the query result of a select star, and then we convert it to JSON format. How do we convert it? We actually add a label called data. This is label, and then this is the value. So this is this data means the input, but this data means the label. So if you don't like the data as a label, which is a little bit confusing because both of them are data, you can call this one WACU if you like. Okay, change this to WACU. But in the front end, you need to do the same thing. Okay, so that's how we do the get all. And then we can also do insert, but this one we use the post method, which means the request is going to be in the body. So because the request in the body, so this is how we retrieve the parameter from the request body. So we get the name from the request body. And then we simply call insert new name with argument name, which is going to insert a new tuple into the database as we have seen earlier. So we're going to, so this is going to insert the new tuple into a database, but in the meanwhile, we are going to return the new tuple back to the caller, and in this case, it's going to be here in the result. So this is a caller. So the new tuple is also in the result, and then the result is going to be, by the way, the result is actually a promise because this is actually a promise. So we call the result is a promise. The way we call it is by using either .then or .catch, two cases. .then means successful, .catch means it's error. So if it's successful, this callback function will be called, which is going to be label this. Otherwise, we are going to print out an error message in the server side. Okay. And then this is a search. Again, it's a get method. And then over here, we use a comma name, means this is actually a parameter that we are going to use in the URL. So that means I can also try this function. So for example, I want to search book. I can only need to, let me see. So the URL is going to look like, it's going to be search and then name. So I'm going to say /search then name. Which name do we want to search? Let's say search book. So that's going to be this, and then I can also search for Peter. So it's going to be search Peter, okay, and then only Peter will result. So all the get method, I can just test it out by the URL, and this tells you what the URL is going to look like. Basically, it's a search suffixed by the name you want to search. So that's the search. Then the next one is called patch method. The patch usually is used for update, means you already have some value, you want to update it. And here we are going to retrieve the 2 argument ID and name from the body, okay? And this is how we retrieve it, because we're assuming ID is first, name is second in the body, okay? And then we are going to call this. Actually, the result is going to be a promise, which is update name by ID. And then our update name by ID over here. Okay, which is going to be this one, update name by ID. So we do have 2 arguments over here. So this is going to be give you a synchronous function. And then we use then and a catch in the same way. If it's successful, we are simply going to return a JSON value, key value here. Success is label or attribute, and true is the value. So this is going to be returned. Otherwise, we print out an error message. We can also do a delete. And this one is also a delete method over here. And as you can see, it's actually a URL. So I believe I can also call this. Let me try it. So I can say delete Peter. I think I cannot call it. This is a get method. So this is a delete method. So anyway, I can retrieve that ID from the parameters request.params, because the delete ID is going to be in the request.params. Interestingly, it's not in the body because it's a delete method. And then I also create a function called debug, which is you can call by the URL. So you simply say call debug over here, and debug, okay. And when you call this, when we do this method will be invoked, okay. And this you can call in the front end, so you can add it later. I cannot use URL because it's a post. So you retrieve the debug. In this case, debug is a variable that we want to debug. The name not so good. Maybe I should use a bar or variable or something, or X or something. So anyway, this is debug, means the variable we want to debug, and then we simply return the response.json, and we are going to print out the variable. So this debug is a variable, we print it out. And then we are able to do the test DB. The test DB is so this one is used to debug the front end, and this one is used to debug the back end. So this one, we are assuming the debug is going to be a variable in the front end, and we want to print out in the console of the back end. So this one we use it to test all the database method. All you need to do is change line 122 by whatever database method you want to call. Make sure all of these are hard-coded arguments, so you don't get into the problem of interaction with the front end. You don't want to interact with the front end. You just want to test out the back end first. Make sure you always test all the method of the back end first before you connect to the front end. Okay, that's very important. So in this way, you can return the response to the front end with the label, test the data, or you can print all the error over here. So I'm not going to explain this. We already know this. So this is very much the endpoint provided by app.js. Now it's time. Let us look at the front end. The front end have two files. One is index.html, which very much just give you the interface of add name, search, and then a table. So these three objects. And then each of these objects actually have their own ID. So for example, the add name, you put ID over here. So this ID represent this text field over here so that we can retrieve it. On the other hand, for the search, I also have ID, which is search input. It's going to point into this text box over here so we can retrieve its own value. And then finally, for the table, is right here. And then we also have the update row. You cannot see it right now, but if you click edit, then you're able to see this. So this text field over here is going to be pointed to by this ID, which is called update row button. So both the text field as well as the button, they have a unique ID. So you can easily identify them in the code of index.js. So that's what we're going to look at now. Again, here I explain what a promise is. You can read it more carefully to understand what a promise and also the arrow function as well. So we need to understand what is arrow function, what is the promise, then you will understand the rest of the code more easily. So the first thing is, as we have shown before, is we always call the get all when we load the document. So this is the listener, which is a function from here to here. Okay, this function, anonymous function, is going to be called when we load the index.html. And what it does is essentially retrieve the table by calling this endpoint in the back end, calling the get all over here, calling this. So basically we are calling this. And then the result, if it's successful, is going to convert into JSON. And then using the function load HTML table to render the JSON into nice HTML table. And keep in mind the data need to be retrieved by the data indexed by data, because remember we actually, when we do the get all over here, we put the label here for the data. So we only need to retrieve this element labeled by data, and that's what we do over here. So this is basically retrieve that particular element data. And then we using the add button ID. This is how you reference it by the prompt with the name of the ID to get add button. and then we attach a function over here from here, which is anonymous again, to the add button. Otherwise, you click add button, nothing is going to happen. So now, because this function is attached to the add button, whenever you click add button, then this function is going to be called. What it's going to do is going to retrieve the new name from the text field of name input, which is this text field over here, and then you clear it up so that you can use it for the next insert. And then we call the backend endpoint insert over here, corresponding to the insert method right here is here, line 19. Okay, and when we call it, we use a method post, and that corresponding to the post over here. So there's a correspondence, and then we are going to in the body we put the name in the body. We use JSON format, so it's going to be a key value pair with the key being name, and the name over here is the value that we retrieve just now from the text field of the HTML form. And then once we have that, so this is going to be called, then that means this is called a backend. The backend is going to return, it's going to insert the new tuple, the new name into a database, but also going to return a new tuple over here. And that new tuple is going to be in the data, and then we're going to call insert row into table so that this new tuple is going to show up in the front page as well. So basically, the function insert row into table basically is modifying this table so that the new say Jack, this new name is going to be inserted into the database, but also inserted into this table as well. Okay, so that's exactly done by line 90 over here. And then to the search, very similarly, you use the search button ID to retrieve the search button. Then we bind this function to the search. So when you click the search button, this function is going to be called with the search keyword retrieved using the search input ID. We clear it up so we can do another search. We call it backend. In this time, we call this plus search value. So basically, this is concatenation using the plus. So definitely, it's going to be a get method because we are using URL. So that's going to call the search, which is right here. We use the URL to call. And then the result is going to be, if it's smooth, it's going to be return the JSON format of a table. Okay, and then using the same way, we are able to render this table. One special case is the data could be empty, means when we do a search, there's no result. So this result, the input of the argument of load HTML could be null. In that case, load HTML table is going to show no data, such as, for example, I say TDD doesn't exist. I'm sorry, what is that? DDD, I search. Nothing is DDD. Oh, I use a DDD. So let's say JT. There's no JT. Then you are going to show no data. So this is done by this function load HTML table with the if else. If there's data, we show it. If no data, we show no data. Okay. And then here, for the query selector, when we click the delete button, it takes a little while to identify the delete button. So we are going to check using the if statement to check if its delete button is clicked, then we call delete row by ID over here. And then and here's the interesting part. I call a debug function, which I create myself. You can debug this variable. So whenever you call debug, basically the backend is going to show the value of this variable. I just use debug to call the backend and send the value of row to delete to the backend and show that value in the console of the backend of there. Okay, you can always comment all of this out. So this is how you how you decide when you click this. Let me see. Let me say search all. So when you click delete, okay, then what's going to happen is the ID and also the name, the ID. When you click delete over here, that corresponding ID is going to be enabled. How do we know that? Because we need to look at index.html. Over here, we do all right. So let's come back to this. I'm not going to worry about that. So okay, let's go back to the index.js. What's next? So we do query, and then after we are done, so this is actually two cases. If it's delete, we call this. If it's edit, we're gonna call show edit row interface. So this basically this function is actually going to show this update form over here. So that's what's done by the by this function called show edit row interface, which is going to show the edit row interface. Okay, so this delete row by ID is a function that we write in the front end, which is called here. Okay, with the argument, which is the ID we need to delete. You can always debug the ID first to look at if the ID is the one you are going to delete. And then we use this, call this the backend endpoint. Make sure the method is called delete because that's what we do. Okay. So that's the backend over here. So the delete is actually have to use a delete method. So corresponding, we have to use the delete method over here. We put them together as a URL, and then we use the to then over here. If it's we convert it to the JSON format, and then the output of that is going to be checking if it's successful. We're going to call the JavaScript to delete the row. Delete row will delete that particular row. So in this way, the row will be deleted in the front end over here. Okay, so the row will not only deleted by the back end, but also deleted from the end. So this will delete from the front end, and this will show the edit row interface. We first using this ID to identify this, we clear it up. Okay, and then we are going to get the update section, and then we change the attribute to false. Then it's going to show up. Okay, and then we have this ID. We can always debug it and take a look. And then eventually we call the document query select to get the update button. Now, once we get the update button, we can attach a function to this update button, and that update function is going to get the update name, which is from the text field, and then call the backend. Okay. The back end is going to be update. Look at over here. We put a two argument in the body of the request method. The patch method have been used because that's what we are doing here for the update. For the update, we use a patch, so we need to make sure the name match. And then we put the two argument into the body, and this is why in the back end we use these to get the two argument from the body of the function. Okay. And then after that, after we do the edit, if it's successful, we simply use the function location.reload. It's not so nice to call the reloading because it's going to refresh the whole page. There's a better way to do this in React, but we're not going to worry too much about this. So we simply reload it. It means we are going to, when you do reload, essentially we are going to call this all over again because this function is only going to be called when you load the index.html. So it's just going to refresh the page, reload it. Okay. So that's for update, debug. So this is a debug function, which actually is a wrapper for the back end. So any variable in the front end data, I can always call the back end to using the post. So this corresponding to the debug function over here, which is delete. So I have to specify the method. Oh, no, this one, the debug, which is, let me show the debug function. It's going to be, okay, this one. Okay, so this is what we are calling. So the method is going to be post. So that's why over here I use post. Calling debug function, and then we use a label debug. The data is over here, so you can retrieve. Over here we can retrieve it from the body because that's where we put over here. Okay, so we retrieve the debug, and then we can use the console to display it. So any variable in the front end can be displayed in the back end in the console. And then this one is insert row into table, basically giving the JSON format of the data. We are going to format it into a nice table. I'm not going to repeat this. Basically use the for each. So here for each key, and then we are just going to display this nicely. Okay, it's all HTML. We have two cases. If there's no data, we say no data. If there's data, we show the data. So very much just if else, load HTML table. So this is insert row into table. So this depends on if you already have something there or not. So if not, and then so this one on the other hand is just load the whole data into the table and show it as a table. Okay. We do have a case in which if the data has no data, we show the no data there. Otherwise, we show it as a table. I explain the code a little better in the comments. Essentially, you're using the for each error to add every row into the table. Okay. So let me see if I cover everything already. And I think over here, I have a set delete ID is request operand. So let me see how that's encoded. When I call delete, so this is delete over here. Okay, so this is a delete. Okay, so yes, so this is how we encode the argument. The ID is over here. we encode it by the plus. But turns out in the server side, when we do this, actually the way you get a parameter is using this. Okay, I think similarly for the get. So get, you always get it from request.params, basically it's get it from the URL. Otherwise, you get it from the body. Either you get it from the body, request.body, or you get it from the request.params, based on which method you're using. All right, so that concludes our explanation of all the code for the back end as well as for the front end. Don't forget, you work with the people together. It's a collaboration skill. It's very important. I want to emphasize that so that you can learn more from this class. All right. So thank you so much. Have a nice day.